So the last video cut me off before I, got to finish the sentence. So I'm just gonna reiterate. So this is my third video, why Andrew Cuomo should not be the governor or president, and why he should probably be in prison. Something of that nature. Anyway, they're all important videos. Check them out. They're in order. And the second one is uploading right now as you might be watching this one, or is coming out right before you might see the second part, and then you'll get this. This is a lengthy article, so I couldn't get through it. It's a current affairs article. It's a fantastic article, and it's entitled "Stop Trying to Make Andrew Cuomo a Thing" or something like that. But again, I discussed it in the first video. So again, I'll put the link for this video below. I'll put the link for this article below in the description above before I describe the video. I might be accused, this is the author of the article, and continuing from part 2. I might be accused, as leftists often are, of expecting politicians to be perfect. I don't. This is a horrible, unprecedented disaster that has stretched the flaws in our social fabric to the limit. And the governor of a U.S. state, even if he were a good person, which Cuomo is not, wouldn't be able to magically save the lives of all his citizens or cancel the infection rate of this hideously contagious disease. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, however, does seem to be doing a fairly good job, and if you simply must lust after a governor, he also has decent politics and is objectively a total babe. It's also true that New York is testing aggressively in comparison to other states, which is another reason our infection rate is so high, though it's likely even higher than the stated numbers, as many people with mild or asymptomatic cases are not getting tested at all, including some friends of mine. But the fact is, just change that a little bit. But the fact is that Cuomo, at multiple times in the past, including literally last week, has failed to use his authority wisely. He's a good showman, but his commitments are as superficial as his outfits. He rarely takes responsibility for his actions, doesn't accept criticism, and is devoted to railroading opposition either openly or behind closed doors. Sounds a lot like Donald Trump again, like I've been saying. Bill de Blasio is a conservative Republican, a right-wing Republican, with a D in front of his name. As New York Magazine, which there are a lot of, as New York Magazine reports, de Blasio grew exacerbate. I know the word. I don't know why I'm saying it funny. De Blasio grew exasperated, going on NY1 in 2015 and accusing Cuomo of waging a vendetta against anyone who dared disagree with him. With all due respect, maybe what the mayor was witnessing is something different, a former Cuomo advisor says, which is, we hate you until we need you, and then we love you, which is not hard to understand, and right now, we were in the we hate you phase, but there will come a point in time when we need you, and then we'll love you. Have we come to the point in time where we need Cuomo? Do we have no choice now but to love him? Is he hot, or are we just desperate? I don't watch cable news, so even before the quarantine, I've sometimes had the experience of living in a locked-in dystopian novel. I'll just be going about my business when lots of people suddenly start saying something incredibly stupid, all at the same time. I can try to argue with them using facts and documented events, for example, Cuomo's whole history, but even liberals who pride themselves on their love of facts and documented events will simply reply with something like, Andrew Cuomo is America's governor. I trust him. How to explain this mysterious infection of unreason, of willful ignorance in liberals, not conservatives, who will say they're never ill, there's nothing wrong, they feel fine, they know and care about the facts. You can trace the virus back to its sources, fawning essays in legacy publications and TV news networks. Sorry, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry, just a little glitch there. I don't know what caused it, but I fixed it. You can trace the virus back to its sources, fawning essays in legacy publications and TV news networks and the feedback loop between the two. Fox may be Trump's propaganda network, but let's be honest about what MSNBC and CNN... Fox may be Trump's propaganda network, but let's be honest about what MSNBC and CNN have become, and to some degree, have been for a while. As the New York Times gushes, Cuomo's briefings, articulate, consistent, and often tinged with empathy, have become must-see television. On Tuesday, his address was carried live on all 4 networks in New York and a raft of cable news stations, including CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. These press briefings are rarely presented with the honest framing or context needed to explain who this suddenly lauded state official really is or what he's actually done in his career. No further information is necessary. Cuomo is the hero of the moment, and we all need a hero right now. Or rather, we shouldn't question why we think we need a hero. For liberals, the moment Cuomo brusquely critiqued Trump on TV, he became a champion of the hashtag resistance and a sex symbol, the new Robert Mueller, the strong man we can trust up until the day he too inevitably disappoints and is swept under the rug like so many other forgotten statues, functionally identical to the last one. Unless, as Deuce Nice fears, we make Cuomo president instead. In response to activist Wendy Brands, who tweeted, "Cuomo's the same as he's always been, but someone needs to sound decisive now, and Americans are complete fools for charismatic savior types." Jesus replied, "The bar is so low, literally O.J. Simpson could be president of this country if he gave like 3 good speeches." The bar is indeed extremely low. As Ben Smith of the New York Times proudly points out, Mr. Cuomo holds news conferences filled with facts and accurate numbers almost every day. He explains systems and challenges and decision-making with a command that Mr. Trump lacks. He even models social distancing by having speakers stay 6 feet apart from one another. Facts, accurate numbers, correct behavior. It's a liberal wet dream. Cuomo, for the moment, has managed to look the part. He's handling the crisis better than Trump, again, extremely low bar, so his record doesn't matter. Either his past actions or his shitty present ones. Cuomo is popular because he is on TV, because he looks like the kind of guy who ought to be on TV. He's wearing short sleeves, he seems tough, but sometimes he speaks with relatable sympathy about his daughters. He's a divorced dad hero of an action movie, a mostly useless and unpleasant asshole who gets to step up when the situation calls for it, just in time to prove to his family and his ex that he knew what he was doing all along. For some people, this is enough. All they want is someone who fills the role. Of course, if all you want is for someone to successfully play the role of hero and governor and then possibly president, maybe you should have elected an actor after all. It's a shame that despite Cynthia Nixon's excellent policies and documented activist commitments, Miranda from Sex and the City wasn't the right kind of character. It is a shame, actually. I don't really like that show, but she was one hell of a candidate and definitely pushed Cuomo to the left, but obviously would have been far more progressive and successful and instituted logical, efficient, economically driving policies for the lower and middle class. For all Americans, really. There are certain ways we want a governor or president to look on TV. They have to talk about their plans and getting things done in pragmatism and tell stories about a woman I met in Topeka who works out of a mine shaft and has a heart valve condition and 5 adopted frog children. And she said to me, ... candidates need a certain kind of cadence, like the one that Buttigieg stole and filled with completely empty nonsense words and yet still won 26 delegates. They have to sound presidential, which basically means sounding like presidents in disaster movies. They have to reassure America in a very calm voice. They have to project strength and display leadership, which means they are in charge and you are not. They don't necessarily have to be white or male, though clearly it's an advantage most of the time. What's really important is that they have to project a particular kind of reassuring dad or mom energy. They need to make you think, if I vote for this person, I can switch my brain off and let them handle it. Trump, ironically, the ultimate president on TV, obsessed with his ratings and his coverage, is still not a TV president. This is half of why many liberals object to him, and half of why his fans trollishly like him. Unless he's praising the military, Trump rarely looks or acts the part. Bernie Sanders, with his working-class Jewish accent, never does. I get that people are frightened. I am completely fucking terrified every second of the day. I understand that right now, any reassuring figure on the TV seems nice. But on the other hand, I feel like maybe it's a bad idea to encourage authoritarians who love attention, get embroiled in petty vendettas, fundamentally despise you, and believe better things are only possible if rich people sign off on them first. Andrew Cuomo seems like the dad who will tell you what to do. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, feels like the ethnic grandpa who will yell at the people who aren't doing enough for you and insist that you yourself can do more. I appreciate why one is more comforting than the other right now, but, and this is hard to hear, you actually aren't doing enough. Instead of lulling yourself into the false hope that Cuomo or anyone else will provide for your needs over those rich people, you can take action. A great way to battle that sense of hopelessness is to look into your local organizations and mutual aid groups, whether you need help or can give it. These organizations deserve your money and your time. I linked a few good ones in the previous sentence, but if you like, here's a master list of all the mutual aid networks in North America. That's awesome. That's so awesome that she did this. I'm so impressed with this article. It's fantastic. It's so great. I'm gonna pull it up and pause reading this article just for a second because that's so cool. I'm not gonna have time to go through them all if it's a master list of everyone in America, but I would like. Oh, does it want me to download it? I don't know. I don't know if this is working right. Guides and other resources. Look at this. Collective care is our best weapon against COVID-19. You got a link. How do you get, how to, for documents. This is fantastic. Coronavirus resource kit, neighborhood pods, how to, a neighborhood invitation regarding coronavirus, COVID-19 communication symbols, printable mutual aid flyer, database of localized resources during corona outbreak, mutual aid 101, COVID-19 mutual aid resource, United States Pacific, COVID-19 resources for undocumented communities. It's fantastic. How to make a mutual aid map. Safety practices for food and supply distribution. Hashtag Chefs for America, COVID-19 map and resources. This is awesome. So you can check those links out, and that's why I always link the articles at the bottom of my videos. And this, I really wanted to cover that. That's really cool. It's a good starting point. I'm not gonna dig into it because it'll take too much time. I am gonna go back to reading the article I was just reading you. But for some reason, okay, here we go. But it's just that's important, and hopefully that can help you guys. So the author continues. The federal government and Cuomo are debating sending people... Why did it just do that? What's happening? It's so crazy. I did this a long time ago. It's really delayed. Hold on. The federal government and Cuomo are debating sending people back to work in a few weeks, well before it's safe. But this doesn't have to happen if we agree not to go. I like that. The federal government and Cuomo are debating sending people back to work in a few weeks, well before it's safe. But this doesn't have to happen if we agree not to go. That is, if we embark on a general strike or take other large-scale collective action. The economy doesn't work without us. We're stronger than the bosses right now. There's a lot we can do to help each other. We're not alone. We're definitely living in unprecedented times, and we'll never return to normal. Whatever future is headed our way, it won't resemble the past. You're totally allowed to have nostalgia for that, of course. I can't blame you for a moment. But please don't worship a daddy figure who says he's going to stand up to the bullies and fix everything. One, because it isn't true. Andrew Cuomo is also a fucking bully and has been for years. And because you're a grown adult and it's time to take charge of your life. We're in this together, which means we aren't here to be passively led or saved by the nearest guy we decide is cute just because we're horny and scared. We have to be our own sexy heroes and heroines. We have to save ourselves together. Wow. Wow. This is great. I'm going to read it. The cover photo, Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council announcement, was credited to Zach Seward, and said she gives a sincere thanks to Guy Ben Aharon and the good people at NSF Wonks who provided me with links to some of the many, many appalling things that Cuomo has done. If you enjoyed this article, please consider subscribing to our magnificent print edition or making a donation. Current Affairs is 100% reader supported, which is awesome. And again, the author was Lita Gold. And there's more info from Lita Gold. Fantastic. Absolutely incredible. Great article. I don't even know what to add to it at the end there, but I think I'm going to, real quick, give you some more info here. All right, so if you actually look, there's plenty of articles throughout the years of why Cuomo is the worst. Here's a recent one. Coronavirus. This is from Reason.com. 3 ways New York botched the coronavirus response in March. A hapless mayor and overpraised governor made false promises, gave inaccurate health information, and helped turn Gotham into the pandemic's epicenter, according to the New York Times. This article is by Matt Welch. It was published on April 9th, 2020 at 12:45 p.m. That's a picture of Mayor Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. The New York Times Wednesday published a long and damning breakdown of how the overlapping and eternally feuding governments of the city and state of New York helped turn the already difficult challenge of managing COVID-19 in the country's densest metropolitan area into the health and public policy catastrophe we are enduring today. I'm going to do a separate video about this article. This breaks down the article and adds their own stuff, but I'll do the New York Times article within the next 3 to 5 videos, probably maybe even the next one. But it won't be a part of this series. It'll just be a standalone video. This is no mere didn't take that one meeting or memo seriously kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, which too often passes for post-facto analysis of government crisis management. Instead, it's a detailed yet necessarily incomplete list of false promises, bad epidemiological advice, and ideologically motivated decision-making. It's impossible to measure precisely the extra infection/morbidity rates caused by New York's abundant policy errors, but the article quotes an estimate from the person with the most directly relevant resume, former Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, Director Thomas Frieden, who prior to holding that post for the entirety of President Barack Obama's administration was Health Commissioner for the City of New York. Frieden said that if the state and city had adopted widespread social distancing measures a week or two earlier, including closing schools, stores, and restaurants, the Times reported, then the estimated death toll from the outbreak might have been reduced by 50 to 80%. It is not necessary to share Frieden's numerical assumptions or mitigation preferences in order to assign some direct policy blame. Here are 3 main categories of New York's COVID response failure. 1. False promises. The article starts with the last time that Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio made a joint appearance to address their constituents. March 2nd, the day after the first New Yorker tested positive for COVID-19. Out of an abundance of caution, we will be contacting the people who were on the flight with her from Iran to New York, Cuomo vowed. However, no one ever did that work, the Times found. The CDC, which has failed to heed its own guidelines on multiple occasions during the crisis, nonetheless spells out very clearly in its 2006 implementation plan for the National Strategy for Pandemic Influenza the importance of government leaders shooting straight. Timely, accurate, credible, and coordinated messages will be necessary during a pandemic, and inconsistent reporting or guidance within and between nations can lead to confusion and a loss of confidence by the public, the plan advises. Information provided by public health officials should therefore be useful, addressing immediate needs, but it should also help private citizens recognize and understand the degree to which their collective actions will shape the course of a pandemic. Both the widely mocked de Blasio and the overly adulated Cuomo have repeatedly failed on these communicative accounts. Like the president they despise, for example, both men made empty, early boasts about their ability to withstand the worst. We can really keep this thing contained, de Blasio said on February 26. Everybody is doing exactly what we need to do, Cuomo said at their March 2nd press conference. We have been ahead of this from day one. The cruel exponential math of epidemics can make exercises in hindsight seem nitpicky, even unfair. But New York's political chieftains weren't just making promises they couldn't keep, they were actively dispensing advice and crafting policy in contradiction to the understood science at the time. 2. Bad epidemiological advice. On February 2nd, de Blasio stated at a coronavirus press conference that what is clear is the only way you get it is with substantial contact with somebody who already has it. You don't get it from a surface. You don't get it from glancing or very temporary contact based on what we now know now. New York Health Commissioner Dr. Osiris Barbett added, "This is not a time to fall prey to false information that you may be seeing on the internet, to fall prey to the stigma. This is not something that you're going to contract in the subway or on the bus." Both of those confident assertions were not, in fact, summations of what was known about coronavirus transmissibility at the time. 3 days before de Blasio's medical advice, at a press briefing of the president's coronavirus task force, Dr. Anthony Fauci stressed not what was conclusively known, but rather what was conclusively not known. The issue now with this is that there's a lot of unknowns, Fauci said. I can't believe de Blasio said that stuff and got that medical person. What was the medical person's name? Dr. Osiris, Oxiris, New York Health Commissioner Dr. Osiris Barbutt. Unbelievable. Anyway, sorry, I'm just reading this as we're reading it together. I've never read this before. Skimmed it to make sure it had good stuff. And yet, even in that January 31st presentation, Fauci made clear what the de Blasio administration would consistently deny for the next 6 weeks, that the virus was devilishly transmissible, including from people who had no reason to believe they were infected. In the beginning, we were not sure if there were asymptomatic infection, which would make it a much broader outbreak than what we're seeing. Now we know for sure that there are, Fauci said, italics mine. It was not clear whether an asymptomatic person could transmit it to someone while they were asymptomatic. Now we know from a recent report from Germany that is absolutely the case. You could fill a whole series of 30-second ads showing de Blasio claiming the exact opposite. On March 10th, the mayor insisted on MSNBC that if you're under 50 and you're healthy, which is most New Yorkers, there's a very little threat here. This disease, even if you were to get it, basically acts like a common cold or flu, and transmission is not that easy. The next day, just hours before the National Basketball Association shut down its entire season, de Blasio urged New Yorkers to not avoid restaurants, not avoid normal things that people do, adding, if you're not sick, you should be going about your life. Wow. It was March 10th. On March 15th, to the irritation of his own health department, the mayor claimed that public health folks say it appears that transmission is when people are symptomatic. Even as late as last week, 63 days after Dr. Fauci said that asymptomatic transmission was a certainty, de Blasio claimed that it was only in the last 48 hours or so that New York City health officials feel they've seen evidence around the world, particularly a new study coming out of Singapore that shows more evidence that this disease can be spread by asymptomatic people. Ideologically motivated decision making. Many of the de Blasio administration's most scientifically unsupported statements during the coronavirus outbreak have been used in the service of justifying his most heavily scrutinized policies. This is no accident. Faced with a literal life and death issue, the mayor has, in several critical moments, chosen his own ideological commitments over the urgent advice of health scientists, none more important than his treatment of the country's largest school system. New York City was far behind the national and international curve in closing down public schools to stop the community spread of COVID-19. The reason had little to do with science. Indeed, Dimitri Daskalakis, the city's head of disease control, reportedly threatened to quit if the schools were not shuttered, as did several other city health officials. But de Blasio sees schools as delivery systems of government services to the poor, and as the Times delicately and overgenerously phrased it, the mayor's progressive political identity had been defined by his attention to the city's have-nots. So even as 36 city virologists were warning that keeping the schools open amounted to gambling with the lives of New Yorkers, de Blasio was exempting the institutions from his order to stop all city gatherings of 500 or more people, explaining with perhaps more literalism than he intended that the schools were one of three things we want to preserve at all cost. Several teachers and union officials have accused the Department of Education of bottling up news about teachers testing positive and threatening educators with reprisals if they warned parents to keep their kids home from possibly infected schools. Preventing the dissemination of bad information is a classic managerial mistake, one particularly endemic in poorly run governments. So, too, is a stubborn unwillingness to learn. Perhaps most distressing in the Times article is not the particulars of policy errors, but an expressed unconcern at acknowledging them. The governor and the mayor emphasized that they had no misgivings about their initial handling of their response. I guess that's the end of that article, yeah. Oh, crazy. Well, if you don't believe I've provided enough evidence for why Andrew Cuomo sucks, here's another nice little gem from the Huff Post here. Don't know why this thing is not spinning. Excuse me a second here. It's spun. Okay. So here you go. Here's another gem. Andrew Cuomo uses budget to cut Medicaid, settle political scores. The New York governor's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has made him a star, but progressives say the new state budget shows his true colors. By Daniel Marins, 4/3/2020, 1:01 a.m. Updated on April 3rd, 2020. Okay. Countries with confirmed COVID-19 cases. This is Governor Cuomo says all New York counties now have confirmed coronavirus cases. That's a video. I'm not going to show that right now. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, Democrat, or D, has struck a deal with state lawmakers to enact a budget that cuts billions of dollars a year from the state's Medicaid system and other social programs and punishes his political enemies in the Progressive Working Families Party. Cuomo, whose daily press conferences about the COVID-19 pandemic have turned him into a national media darling, had endured some pushback in recent days for his plan to take $2.5 billion a year out of the Medicaid program. As they were initially structured, the cuts would have made the state ineligible for $6.7 billion in emergency federal assistance for the state's Medicaid program for the duration of the pandemic, since the money requires states to preserve existing program standards and eligibility guidelines. At the very end of Cuomo's press conference on Thursday, though, Cuomo's budget director, Robert Mujica, announced that they had found a solution, putting a delay on the cuts until after the pandemic crisis passes so the state can get its share of federal money and slash the program later. A state panel's recommended Medicaid reforms, including major cuts, are part of the budget and will be enacted, Mujica said. We have the ability to delay them in the budget so the effective dates can be changed. Cuomo's budget cuts stem, at least in part, from the revenue that the state expects to lose due to the pandemic-spurred economic slowdown. Mujica projects a revenue decline of between $9 billion and $15 billion this coming fiscal year due to COVID-19 related economic fallout. The plan for Medicaid cuts includes $400 million in reduced payments to hospitals, tighter eligibility for certain long-term care benefits, and a massive shift in costs to the state's county governments, the financial strength of which varies greatly. Yeah, so counties with money will be able to deal with this maybe, but counties without money will not. And even counties with money might not be willing to deal with this or help their Medicaid, the poor people in their counties. And this is just terrible. So anyway. The new budget will also maintain current levels of state education funding, which activists consider a de facto cut since the cost of schooling rise every year. For example, the impoverished Rochester School District has already announced that it plans to eliminate 236 jobs in order to fund the coming school year. Leaders of progressive organizations that advocate for the state's working class and low-income residents were furious with Cuomo, arguing that it demonstrated the emptiness of the leadership he has sought to project since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. It's a disaster, said Jess Wisniewski, co-executive director of Citizen Action of New York, a progressive community activism group. He just doubled down on the disinvestment in our communities at a time when, in the past month, there was an opportunity to pivot to make the government work for people who were already in crisis, and now it's crisis on top of crisis. He blew it. Soshi Namika, director of the New York Working Families Party, which functions as a progressive faction within the broader Democratic tent, warned staters against mistaking Cuomo's apparent managerial competence for a commitment to policies that will help state residents weather the crisis. New Yorkers know full well there's a version of our governor in the daytime and a version that directly affects our well-being, that directly affects our ability to make it out of the crisis, and that is the governor we have known for many, many years. He just doubled down on the... Oh, we already read that. Progressives' disappointment, however, is not limited to a governor with whom they consistently clash. The Democratic leaders in the legislature, Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins and Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, not only agreed to the cuts, but they also granted the governor emergency powers to adjust the budget as he saw fit in the middle of the year. The legislature would have a narrow window to challenge any budgetary changes the governor made unilaterally, but the onus would be on them to act. The legislature was completely in the dark through this, Namika said. The value of having a blue trifecta state was completely eroded in this cycle. The budget legislation, which also rolls back some of the 2019 reforms restricting judges' ability to impose cash bail on New Yorkers awaiting trial, passed in the state Senate on Thursday afternoon. This bill is expected to pass the Assembly easily before it heads to Cuomo's desk to become law. If the state Senate, five progressive Democrats voted against in the state Senate, five progressive Democrats voted against the legislation, four of whom were elected for the first time in September 2018 with the help of the Working Families Party and its allies. The new crop of progressive lawmakers is doing really great, said Michael Kink, executive director of the Strong Economy for All Coalition, which includes Citizen Action and many of the same labor and community groups that fund the WFP. What we need are more like them. WFP is Working Families Party, if you lost that for a second. Okay. But the new budget erects barriers to the growth of the progressive movement in the state by making it harder for the Working Families Party to qualify for a ballot line. New York has a system of fusion voting that allows candidates for state office to run as the nominees of multiple political parties. Generally speaking, the process aims to give New Yorkers a chance to give voice to the diversity within the two main parties. For example, every election, the WFP can point to the number of state voters who voted for Democratic candidates on the WFP ballot line rather than the standard Democratic one as evidence of progressive strength within the party. But Cuomo, who fought off a primary challenge backed by the WFP in 2018, has made it a mission to weaken the WFP. He tasked a public commission to recommend changes that would raise the threshold for third parties to qualify for a ballot line, but the state Supreme Court stopped the implementation of the rule change in mid-March on the grounds that enacting them through a commission violated the state's constitution. Instead, Cuomo put the higher thresholds into the budget with the apparent blessing of Democratic leaders in the legislature. The WFP, which received 114,000 votes in the 2018 gubernatorial election, will now have to receive 130,000 votes, or 2% of the total vote, whichever is higher, in both the presidential and the gubernatorial elections. In case you don't know what gubernatorial means, it just means an election for a governor. The only third party that crossed that threshold in 2018 was the Conservative Party, a ballot line used by conservative Republicans. The WFP is exploring opportunities to further challenge the change in court, according to Nameka. Barring that, it plans to improve its registration and turnout efforts in the 2022 election in order to meet the new threshold. HuffPost requested responses to the progressive criticisms on Thursday afternoon from spokespeople for Cuomo, Stewart, Cousins, and Heastie, and has not received replies. Not all of the policies in Cuomo's budget will anger progressives. He has included a regulation capping individual out-of-pocket spending on insulin at $100 per 30-day supply. That's Andrew Cuomo, if you didn't know. But progressives are disappointed in Cuomo for standing by his refusal to raise taxes on the state's wealthiest residents during a time of crisis. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, then New York Governor David Paterson, Democrat, raised taxes on higher earners to help close a budget shortfall. Cuomo, who inherited the tax when he took office in 2011, worked with the legislature to partially undo it. Cuomo has argued that such a tax increase would hamper economic development and could cause wealthy people to leave the state, since it already has relatively high income taxes. Left-leaning advocates like Kink consider Cuomo's multi-billion-dollar spending on incentives for big business a much more questionable choice for the state's budget and economy. The super wealthy still have a ton of money, and Cuomo was acting as if they've been hurt as much as laid-off restaurant workers or an Amazon worker trying to dodge the coronavirus in a warehouse, King said. He is just not connected to the economic reality the way that he is connected to the day-to-day numbers on the coronavirus. I was thinking about playing this video. I mean, the more you read about this guy, just Andrew Cuomo is the fucking worst. From any, it doesn't matter what your political perspective is. And here's another article. This is from the New York Times. This is from last year, but it's important to set up what they were talking about in the previous article I read from HuffPost. Ocasio-Cortez, Warren, and Sanders in an unlikely skirmish with New York Democrats. The state Democratic Party, which is controlled by Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, passed a resolution to end so-called fusion voting in New York by Jesse McKinley and Shane Goldmacher. My son's name is Shane. March 5th, 2019. What you need to know to start the day. Get New York today in your... Oh, so I didn't mean to read that. Anyway, Albany. A handful of the nation's leading left-leaning Democrats... That's a weird way to say that. A handful of the nation's leading left-leaning Democrats, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, have picked a fight with an unexpected opponent, the New York State Democratic Party. They are fighting over an arcane but critical aspect of New York's election laws that gives small parties the ability to wield significant influence in state politics. The practice, known as fusion voting, allows small political parties to cross-endorse major candidates, which has enabled organizations like the Working Families Party, to become a darling of the progressive left and a growing irritant to Governor Andrew Cuomo. The Working Families Party is also known as WFP. The State Democratic Party on Monday passed a resolution to get rid of fusion voting. New York is only one of a small handful of states that allow it. Mr. Cuomo has not taken a public position on fusion voting, but it seemed unlikely that the State Democratic Party, whose fealty to the governor is so pronounced that the prayer at the 2018 convention praised his accomplishments, would act without his approval. As such, the dispute could open another fault line between the party's establishment, represented by Mr. Cuomo, a lifelong centrist who has banked to the left in his second term, and the party's more insurgent wing, which is still suspicious of the governor's history of working with Republicans. Mr. Sanders asked Mr. Cuomo on Twitter about his feelings on the issue, saying the state party's proposed action reeks of vengeance against progressives in the Working Families Party, which endorsed Cynthia Nixon in her unsuccessful primary challenge against the governor last year. Let me just stop and say this thing where they call Andrew Cuomo a centrist. Andrew Cuomo is not a centrist. He's a right-wing politician that pretends that he's a progressive. Okay? Which is a lot of them. He is an elite corporate Democrat who is only considered a centrist because our political spectrum for like the last 30, 40 years has moved so far to the right that they've changed the meaning. But a true centrist would be appalled by, in the traditional sense of the political spectrum. He is not a centrist. He is a right-wing politician by almost any measure. Anyway, just wanted to make sure that was clear. It's a shame that they do this a lot, call these people centrists when they're very conservative or right-wing. All right, anyway. Mr. Sanders asked Mr. Cuomo on Twitter about his feelings on the issue, saying the state party's proposed action reeks of vengeance against progressives and the Working Families Party, which endorsed Cynthia Nixon in her unsuccessful primary challenge against the governor last year. What's more, it's anti-democratic, Mr. Sanders said on Twitter. We should be for more democracy, not less. Do you agree, at New York Governor Cuomo? That tweet was later deleted and replaced with a less confrontational comment. Josh Orton, a spokesman for Mr. Sanders, said an early draft of the senator's tweet was accidentally posted and then quickly replaced, and that Mr. Cuomo's team had not communicated any reaction about the initial tweet. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez also on Twitter conveyed her support for the practice, decrying New York's notorious closed party primaries and calcified political machines, and calling fusion voting one of the few bright spots that allows independent New Yorkers to vote their values. There isn't a single good reason to eliminate it, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez wrote. A Cuomo administration official suggested on Monday that the Working Families Party was creating an imagined conflict to stir up support for itself. I know they were humiliated in last year's governor's race, but that's no excuse to run around spreading lies and ranting about conspiracies, said Richard Azzopardi, a senior advisor to Mr. Cuomo. It's both sad and a bad look. The state party's resolution has little practical impact. Any effort to eliminate fusion voting must be approved by the Democratic-controlled state legislature, and such legislation would likely face a difficult path even with the state party supporting the move. Many Democratic lawmakers benefit from appearing on multiple lines. Much of the Senate Democratic Conference, which took control of Albany's upper chamber in January, is opposed to eliminating fusion voting, including a block of 6 newly elected senators who, in a letter released on Monday, thanked the WFP and fusion voting for getting them into office. Progressives want to make it easier for voters to express their values and viewpoints, not harder, the 6 senators wrote. That means mending our current system of fusion voting, not ending it. A spokesman for the Senate Democrats, Mike Murphy, said there was no legislative proposal to end fusion voting and that the Senate majority had been clear that we support efforts to empower voters and strengthen New York's democracy. By day's end, nearly 24 Democratic senators, in a letter to the Democratic leader, Senator Andrea Stewart's cousins, said that abolishing fusion voting was a bad idea. They also called on Ms. Stewart cousins to decouple any negotiation over fusion voting from the budget due April 1st, when Mr. Cuomo would have some leverage over lawmakers. The policy debate is too important to New York voters to be left to the 11th hour, the letter read. On the other side of the Capitol, the Democratic Speaker of the Assembly, Carl E. Heastie of the Bronx, was more circumspect, saying he and his conference had not yet discussed the issue. Fusion voting helps facilitate the survival of parties like the Conservative Party and the Independent Party, which often endorse Republicans. Under state law, any party which receives 50,000 votes in a gubernatorial election is guaranteed a spot on the ballot for the next 4 years. Mr. Cuomo collected votes on 4 different ballot lines, including the Working Families Party, on the way toward a record vote tally in November. But the WFP did not endorse Mr. Cuomo in the primary. Party leaders, saying they wanted to support a real Democrat, chose Ms. Nixon. The WFP's bet backfired when Mr. Cuomo badly defeated Ms. Nixon in September, and the group subsequently endorsed Mr. Cuomo in the general election in a humbling reversal. Since then, the party has anticipated retribution for Mr. Cuomo, who has been known to hold a grudge. The WFP continued to issue warning shots to the Democratic Party in the last several days, sending out a battery of letters from supporters of fusion voters, including Senators Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, and most of the state's Democratic House of Representatives delegation, and issuing multiple online pleas for support tagged with hashtag #StandWithWFP and hashtag #NoFusionBan. After the vote on Monday, the group's state director, Bill Lipton, also bashed the resolution, accusing the Democratic State Committee of carrying Cuomo's water to exact revenge against progressives in his party. Luckily, Democratic elected officials, activists, and progressive leaders aren't buying it, Mr. Lipton said. At the party meeting in Westchester on Monday, several supporters of the resolution seemed to suggest that Democrats were fed up with the influence that small parties like the WFP wield. "I'm tired of the tail wagging the dog," said Tim Perfetti, the chairman of the Cortland County Democratic Party. Jay Jacobs, the newly elected party chairman and the head of the Nassau County Democratic Party, denied that Mr. Cuomo had called for the party to take up the ban, saying that he, other county leaders, and members of the party's progressive caucus had long wanted it passed, citing election wins by Republicans thanks to third-party votes. Still, Mr. Jacobs acknowledged that the resolution's passage was unlikely to displease Mr. Cuomo. Is the governor going to be unhappy about it? Mr. Jacobs said. Probably not. So essentially, if you haven't decided Andrew Cuomo is shitty and dishonest and unlikable and an authoritarian and much like Trump and in some ways even worse than Trump, but definitely comparable to Trump in a lot of ways, then you're either in denial, and I don't know how many articles I could possibly show you of people saying similar things and different things and citing evidence, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway, and I'm going to make this a 4-part series because Andrew Cuomo is a piece of shit, and he messed up coronavirus. It spread to New Jersey and other places nearby, Connecticut, I'm sure, and others that have a big commute with people going to school and working in New York, coming from other states. And he put people's lives at risk. He's responsible for their deaths. De Blasio apparently is too. And it's a shame because I like some of what de Blasio had to say and his support for Bernie Sanders, but I'm a little disappointed, to say the least, in his response to coronavirus, which seems atrocious like Cuomo's. And he said some very disingenuous and dishonest things, and they sound like Trump. So they're all responsible. But I'm going to make another video because this is an important issue. And trust me, I'm getting tired of talking about Andrew Cuomo, but this is very important. So I'm going to make a part 4. So get ready for it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please go to patreon.com/punkrockpolitics and become a patron today. The first tier membership starts at just $1, and you get all kinds of perks and early access and content. And, please support Punk Rock Politics so I can make this a full-time thing and so I can give you constant news and updates. And trust me, I will do so many videos on so many important topics consistently once I can make some money on this that you wouldn't even believe it, Thank you so much. I appreciate your support thus far, everybody who supported me and tried to help. Shout out to my friend John Paul Momchin, who probably hasn't watched this far, but I hope I'm wrong, because I made several videos about this. I think a little to his consternation, but because they're lengthy, but they're important. So he's been trying to help me and talk to me about my channel and trying to help me figure out solutions that I have and issues I have to make this to just keep making it a better channel. to have more technology involved and all that kind of good stuff, and some better editing tools and whatnot. So, thanks for supporting Punk Rock Politics. Please share these videos, comment, like them, get them out there. Definitely go to patreon.com/punkrockpolitics and check me out. All right, thanks very much.